And welcome back once again to this tutorial series on implementing a basic quest in Divinity Original Sin 2. This episode we are finally going to start looking at encounters. So let's dive right in. Obviously the easiest thing that you could do to create an encounter is to just go to your root templates. You could find some creatures that you're interested in, and then you can just place them down anywhere in the level, and as long as they are a faction that is naturally hostile to whatever your hero faction is, then as soon as you are within visibility, the encounter will start. That's not a very good learning tool, so we're going to try to do some things a little differently here. Now the encounter that we're going to do, remembering what the theme of our module is here, we have been set with a quest where we need to find a generator for Larian Studios. So what we're going to do is we're going to stick a generator in our building, and we will have some workers inside the building, and they won't be immediately hostile to us, but then when we go and try and take the generator, that's when we will have them turn hostile and begin combat. First thing we're going to do is we're going to grab the generator, so I'm going to highlight placeable items, and I'm going to look for laboratory machines. And in our case, I'm going to want to find one that is a interactable object here. We don't want to get a object that is just scenery, because then we won't be able to have the option to pick it up. So I'm going to grab this laboratory machines dynamic, and I'm going to add it to the level. Now that's a little big and imposing, so let's take this and scale it down a little bit. It's not going to be very realistic to begin with, of just throwing a generator into your pocket, but we can at least make it look a little better. So we're just going to throw that in there. I'm going to hit the number 3 in order to rotate it. Then I'll hit the number 2 as a shortcut. For the translation tool, we'll just move it over into this corner a little bit. And what we'll do is we will give it our own name instead of this. We will do LDC, and we'll call it generator. Now, as we mentioned, we want to be able to pick this up, because that is going to be the event that will instigate the combat. So we will want to come down here, and you can see this attribute that says can be picked up. We'll want to set that to true. And again, we'll save. The other thing that's annoying me here are these shadows, so I'm going to change this to be a specific atmosphere. I'm going to bring up the work atmosphere panel, and I'm going to force it to go to this work atmosphere down here. That gets rid of shadows. And we'll leave that as it is so we can see a little better. Now what I'm going to do is I want to place 4 NPCs in this interior here. And one thing that I already forgot to do that I should have done, I should have started creating a new layer. This is good practice, again, to follow. When you start having more stuff in your layer, it is good to, when you have more things in your level, it is good to start creating these layers. So I'm going to do something like building interior. I'm going to move that generator that we just placed. Oh, that's the door. The generator is right here. I'm going to drag that up into building interior. And I'm going to make this the active level, so that anything we add now will go in here. We can collapse this. Makes it a lot easier to find things. So now I'm going to right click on characters, and let's just place some humans in here. So first we'll take a maybe a female armor mage. We'll grab that. We're going to stick her in the level right here. I'm going to give her a name. We'll have the female be the LDC, and we'll call her maybe the chief engineer in charge of the generator. Now in this encounter, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to have a group of 3 NPCs that become combatants when you pick up the generator, and one other NPC that does not. So in addition to this chief engineer, I'm going to create another couple of NPCs. Let's do a male heavy armor, and we'll stick him right here. We'll just give him a name like LDC Grease Monkey 1. And since I'm going to create another one that's very similar, well, you know what? Let's make a male armor light. And we'll grab the name here. We'll call this one Grease Monkey 2. And we'll save. Now that we have the 3 NPCs here, we're going to want to set their faction. If I select all 3 and then I click load multiple selected objects, this allows you to change some of the properties for all 3 of them at the same time. You will get a subset of all the properties because not all properties can be set for all of them at the same time. It's things that they can share. So for this, what we want to do is we want to look at their alignment. They're set to good NPC right now. We're just going to change this to neutral. So we'll come down here and we'll call them neutral NPCs. So if we save and then we go and we look at any individual one of them now, neutral, neutral, and neutral. And lastly, we will create one more NPC that's going to be the one that's not going to engage in combat. So we'll just create someone that we're going to treat kind of as a commoner. We'll stick her over here. And for this one, we'll just call her, she's a pacifist. She won't get involved in any fighting. And just to make it interesting, we're going to make her alignment neutral as well. She's really neutral. Another thing to remember about Divinity Original Sin 2 is that it tries to be very system driven, and this is going to be the same thing with encounters. It is very much organized and influenced by the faction system. I believe we brought this up before in the alignment editor. You can see here there are various alignments that are defined. Then you can create different entities, so these are all kinds of different groups, and you can set what the alignment is for those entities. And then in the third tab you can establish what the relationships are between different entities, how they are going to react to each other. So that's what's going to determine when combat begins and who's going to get involved in combat. As soon as 2 factions are hostile to each other, that's when they will engage. In addition, any other creatures within range that are of the same faction will also engage. Not to mention that if you have additional entities that are allies with you, if you as a player get involved in combat, then any other faction that is an ally is also going to join in combat with you. So these are the types of systemics that you're going to have to keep in mind when you design your encounters. Now before we go and actually create the events that will turn this hostile, one thing that we should always do is just make sure that nothing becomes hostile in the default state. So we're just going to run this in the editor. Let's get rid of our root templates for now. And we'll just start with our player over here, and if you remember we can just use the T to teleport in here. And we can walk around in here and you can see nothing happens. We could go over and pick this up. Nobody cares. Now if we wanted to, we could come over here. We could push our luck a little bit. We could do enough damage to this NPC that she'll finally have had enough and enter combat. And once that happens, everyone with the same alignment is now in combat with us, so we can see that we've got, well, we probably should have changed their descriptions so that we could see them over their text. But we've got our engineer there, we've got one grease monkey, we've got the other grease monkey, and even our pacifist over here. Even she's in combat because at this point she's just a neutral alignment like everything else. So they all got upset and aggroed together. So at this point I'm just going to stop here. I'm going to reload the level. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a combat group so that we can see what the effects of that are. To create a combat group, you can come right over here onto the combat group panel. And when you bring this up, we can hit add. And you'll see it brings up a list of available characters that we can put in the combat group. So we're going to choose the chief engineer and each grease monkey. They're going to be a group together. We'll give it a name and we'll say the generator workers. And as far as I can tell, the rest of this is really metadata. I'm guessing that stuff that could be put in here automatically through some scripts that Larian had for their own development got put into one of their wikis. I don't believe there's anything here that actually changes anything. This is just notes for developers, and that's it. Now, what does a combat group do? Combat group does is it ensures that anytime any individual member of that group goes into combat, everyone else will aggro. And you might be thinking after what you just witnessed, well, why do you need that? They all aggroed anyway. They were of the same alignment, and they all entered combat as soon as I attacked one of them. One of the reasons that this might be interesting is because the reason why they all aggroed in this case was because they were within line of sight. They could see what was going on. When you put someone in a combat group, even if they were outside this building with the door closed, they would still aggro, even though they can't get line of sight. So it's a way to guarantee that they will all be included. It's a way to guarantee that when any one of them joins combat, all of them will, regardless of other AI factors. I will demonstrate examples of that a little later on, but first, I think what I want to do is I want to dive into the story script in order to turn our NPCs hostile as soon as we pick up the generator. So remember we reorganized our story goals a little bit last time. We have our start level goal here now, and we're going to create a new sub-item here, and we're just going to call this LDC generator. So all the stuff related to our generator quest will stick in here. So as indicated before, what we want to do is we want to detect when that generator is picked up, and then we will turn the generator workers hostile. So we will use a single frame here, if item added, and I'm going to hit the control spacebar to complete. The one we want is item added to character. Take that. And we have not generated definitions since we added our characters or our generator, so we had better do that if we want to be able to use autocomplete. And we definitely do. It makes life a lot easier. So we'll start typing in our generator here. And if I hit control spacebar, we'll see that we have the generator or the building door. So we want the generator here. And we're going to catch this event no matter which character picks it up. So we're not going to specify a character that we're looking for. We're just going to use a variable so that anytime this item is added to a character, the GUID of the character picking it up will go inside of a variable. And something I haven't been clear about in previous tutorials is that it really doesn't matter what this variable name is. You can give it anything. If we wanted to, we could use that for the variable name, and whoever the character was that picked up the item would be passed into this variable, and we could reuse it in the next statement in order to take actions on that character. But since we want this to be debuggable and human readable, we'll just give it a name underbar char, and then we will decide what we're going to do here. As with a lot of things in Osiris and within the Divinity Original Sin 2 system as a whole, there can be more than one way that you want to do things. For instance, at this point, we could, if we wanted to, we could go through and we could set the faction of each one of those workers to be an evil NPC. So we could permanently change their faction to be an evil NPC so that they would now and forevermore be hostile to the player and any allies to the player, or potentially any other alignments that are hostile to evil NPCs. You could do it that way if you wanted to. It might not be the best solution. If you were going to do that, what you would probably want to do is you would want to create DB entries for each one of your workers up here. You could say DB worker, and we could give it the GUIDs for the engineer, the grease monkeys, and then you would have to have a line down here that says and something like DB worker then, and you would do something like set faction worker, and you could do evil NPC. And this would forever change their alignment to evil NPCs. I don't think that's really the best solution for what we want. I think it's a lot more interesting to take the approach that you will find most often used in Origins when they create these kinds of scenarios, and that's what you can do then. And we're going to use a procedure that they have called set temporary. And if we do the control spacebar, we will see some options here. And it's this proc character set temporary hostile relation. And if we underbar that, then it will set a hostile relation between two characters. We're going to do something simple in this case. We're going to say between the character, and we'll choose that engineer. She really gets upset about this. She's put a lot of time into that generator. Okay. If we do this, what this will do is this will actually create a temporary hostile relationship between the player that took the generator and whatever the alignment of this chief engineer is. So you remember that we set the alignment of the chief engineer to neutral. So you remember when we looked at the alignment editor, we could see the various relationships, say, between the hero and neutral, and it would just be neutral. This is going to change that temporarily. It will cause them to go into combat, but then once combat ends, whether it's in the death of the player or the death of the NPC, or perhaps maybe the player flees, in another test, we'll do something like we'll use an undead character. The undead will play dead, and combat will stop. After the combat rounds have finished, and whatever the outcome is, then the relationships will return to whatever they were beforehand. And that might not be what you want either. Maybe you don't think that's a good solution, because if a player ends combat, perhaps you still want them to be hostile. In that case, what you would probably do is you would create some new factions. You probably would not want to use very common factions for this. You wouldn't want to use neutral NPC or good NPC. You would probably want to create something like angry generator worker factions or something, and you could change them all to that, and you could make angry generator factions hostile to hero, and in that case they would remain hostile for the remainder of their lifetime until you had some other event or decided at some point to change their faction again. But just for this scenario, to show some other interesting cases, we're going to leave this as it is, and we're going to build and reload. Now I'll go back and we'll see what happens when we pick up the generator. I'm going to teleport in here. I'm going to pick this up. And you can see our hero now has a temporary hostile relationship between itself and any neutral NPC. All three of the NPCs are in combat that we want to, but we also have our neutral NPC that is also in combat here. So that's working as expected, though not as we want, ideally, for our complete quest. So I'm going to stop this now, and I want to revisit the idea of the combat groups. So just to demonstrate those at play, I'm going to click on our pacifist here, and I'm going to move her outside the walls. I'm going to save, and then I'm going to do this again. If I come over here and I grab this generator, I'm in combat. But now look what we have. We only have 3 enemies this time. The reason is because if she were closer and she could see our pacifist over here, if she were closer and could see what was going on, she would be hostile. But because her line of sight is blocked by the wall, she doesn't know about this fight that's going on, so she is not involved. Now let's grab her. Let's bring her back in. Let's do the same thing with one of these. I'm going to stick them outside, right around the same place we had her. We're going to save, and we're going to reload the level and story. And we'll come over here. I'll pick this up. Now we're going to see that we have 4 people in combat, even though this human warrior, one of the grease monkeys, is outside the wall. He's in combat still, because we created that combat group. So regardless of line of sight, he's always going to be pulled into combat when any one of the individuals is pulled into combat. Now, something to remember about this. Making entities or making creatures a combat group does not necessarily mean that they will all fight together. For instance, let's say I were to click on this grease monkey right here, and I were to change his alignment to a good NPC. Okay, let's say he's a good guy now. I'm going to reload the level and story. I'll start this, and I will come over here. So once again, the combat group does not necessarily bundle the combatants together as friends. It just guarantees that they will all enter combat at the same time. If I grab this now, our grease monkey down here is indeed in combat, but if I highlight him right here, you see he's green, he's on my side. He's a good NPC. And since hero and good NPC are allies, he's going to fight on my side during this battle. When I set temporary hostile relations with the engineer, it was only between the hero and the neutral NPC factions that became hostile, not with the combat group. And so this guy is going to respect his alignment, and he's going to fight on my side. So let's put him back the way he's supposed to be. We'll make him a neutral. And we'll bring back this guy over here. and we'll save. So again, at this point, we don't really like the fact that our pacifist is getting pulled into the fight. There are a couple options that we have here. One simple one that you could do is you could override this can fight and can join combat. That might be very appropriate for someone that's a pacifist. We come back and we grab this. We'll see that she just kind of cowers over there. She doesn't like fighting, doesn't want any part of it. Even though she's the same faction as the other three, because we got rid of the can fight and can join fight, she's not going to. So that's one method. So let's stop this and we'll go back to can fight and can join combat. Again, the other simple option here is we could change her faction so that she is a good NPC, although in that case she would be an ally and she would join. So that's not going to work. So what are we going to do? Well, we could do one of two things. We could either change the faction of the three of these, or we could change hers. So in this case, let's create a new faction. And we'll call the entity pacifist. We'll add that. We'll have the alignment be neutral. And then we'll come over here to relations and we'll create we say a pacifist is neutral towards neutral NPC. Can make that mutual. Then we can add another entry where pacifist is neutral to a hero so that it won't become an ally anymore. And we'll make that mutual. We'll save. We'll come back. We'll change her alignment to a pacifist. Save. And we'll reload the level of story. And if we come over here, we'll pick this up. And once again, we see that she's over in the corner, doesn't want any part of this fight. We have our fight with the three neutral NPCs over here. And just to make double sure, we'll click. And we'll see that her options to fight and join combat were true, and the reason why she didn't, again, was because of those faction alignments. So these are all things that you're going to have to kind of organize in your head to determine how you want the combat to go. You have to keep in mind what other alignments are around. Are they going to join the player? Will they ignore the player? Will they fight against the player, depending upon who is involved? And set your alignments accordingly. So as you can see, there's not really a lot to it from a technical standpoint. It's much more organizational. And again, I think the hardest part, of course, is balancing encounters, trying to figure out what level your encounter should be for your creatures, and also getting the stats to work out, and getting them to work out in Explorer and Classic, and depending upon what the leveling curve is going to be for your character, that's definitely going to be the most challenging parts, and is a little bit outside the scope of this tutorial series, but something to be aware of. So for one last demonstration, I will go inside the game client and just give an example of how that temporary hostility works and whether or not it's something you actually want to use or if you want to permanently change faction of whatever creatures you have here. Now again, this is specifically looking at scripted events. For many encounters, you may just be setting down creatures that are immediately hostile to your hero. If you're putting demons out there in the world, or undead, whatever it is, there are going to be plenty of encounters that just start out hostile right from the beginning. For this demonstration, we at least wanted to show some scripting so that the encounter starts dynamically rather than just being hard-coded through the alignments and what some of your options are there. So let's take a look at that test in the real game client. So here I am in the game client. I'm going to start up a single instance of our story. And I am going to choose an undead human, because I really want this play dead so we can demonstrate the temporary faction hostility. And we'll start the game. I don't really care about my tags. Actually, our dynamic duo here with Robin could end up messing this up. We need to send her away so that she doesn't aggro into this. Yeah, we'll just level up our strength and constitution a little bit just to make sure we don't die right away with the first hit if we don't have first attack. This doesn't matter. This will also help us. Alright, so you can see we have 3 enemies here, and our pacifist is over there in the corner, so I'm just going to slate it. And you'll see the exit combat. So this might be a mechanic you want to encourage your players to use as something special, or it might not make any sense at all and you would want to set all of their factions to something that would be more permanent. You will notice that the way we scripted this, if we were to drop this and then pick it up again, we'd be right back into it. So every time we pick it up, they will get upset. I believe in the next tutorial we're going to take this quest and we're going to iterate on it a little bit. Instead of just going and grabbing the generator, we will begin a dialogue where we get warned to put it down, and then if we don't, then they will aggro. And we'll add a few more bits and pieces to it as we go along to show some of the interesting things you can do in the scripting. Anyway, I hope this was helpful and that there might have been something you learned with it. If you have any questions or comments, if you see any mistakes that I've made, please feel free to leave your feedback in the comments. You can also try to find me in the forums or in Discord. I'm happy to answer questions as I can. Your best bet is to try to use the public forums though, because that way it's not just you but other people that can get the information as well. Thanks everyone for your support so far, and get out there and make those great mods. People are waiting for them.